Okay, hello everybody. This is Shane Douglas Keene. I'm here with Rich Duncan, and we are Ink Heist. Uh, Today we're joined by I'm going to massacre this. I know better than
No, you
not.
won't. I'm going to tell you how to do it right now. It's Nick Mamatas. Give it a shot.
I would have nailed it, dude.
All right.
Mama Toss. I practiced that shit too, and then I thought I'm going to be wrong. He's going to say, "What are you talking about?" It's Mamatas, dude. What the heck? So yeah, Nick Mamatas. This is the first opportunity that we've had to actually speak to one another. But man, I've been with you for a lot of years, all the same. Um, I Am Providence, I think, was my first experience with you. And is it the last weekend?
Yes, it is the last weekend. I had to
Okay,
think about it myself now because it's been some years.
right, I do that too. And yeah, and People's Republic of Everything, and there's a writing book in there that I adore that I also can't remember the name of right now.
Far better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, well, of course you know. Well, you didn't know the name of that last one I brought up. So, hey.
I always struggle with it because it is heavily riffing on the Lost Weekend, and I am not above making my own mistake and saying, "Oh, my book, the last weekend."
Mm-hmm. I do the same thing. Well, that one I wrote with what has this one part in it. What was that called again?
Or like sometimes it might start as like something and then you like rearrange the words. So like to you, it's something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, yeah, so that's, my not so brief introduction, but tell us about yourself, Nick, and what you're working on and what's coming out. I know we have one to talk about.
So I'm Nick. I am currently living in California. I am an author, an editor, and why I'm here on this podcast is I'm also an anthologist. And in April, my next anthology is coming out. It's called 120 Murders, dark fiction inspired by the alternative era, meaning the alternative music era, college radio, into the alternative music of the 90s.
Go ahead, Rich.
I was just gonna say, like, that's kind of how I know you, Nick. I'm a little like I've read a couple short stories and stuff, but I'm not as experienced as Shane. But I started reading 120 Murders and like the whole intro, that idea is so cool to me. Oh, sorry, must have had a little reverb there. But the whole idea of the alternative era and music anthology, I thought that was so cool. I kind of was a little too young for 120 minutes, but there's like a equivalent show, Subterranean.
Oh, sure.
So like,
right.
And I went and dug back, obviously, like I listened to 90s stuff, but I was just curious, what kind of shape doing a whole era instead of like, say, specific artists or just music in general?
Well, there have been certainly a lot of crime anthologies about certain artists, and that was one inspiration. A local acquaintance of mine, Joe Clifford, kicked it off with the Bruce Springsteen noir anthology, and it's gotten a pretty baroque at this point. They're really, I wouldn't say scraping the bottom of the barrel, but making odd choices. I've seen show tunes. I saw Paul Simon, One Hit Wonders, which is actually pretty good, but that can go anywhere. So I figured something that had a little more juice behind it and that it would cover an entire range of music. Since alternative music is a grab bag, it has rock, it has synth pop, it has goth, it has ska.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not promising any ska in this book. I'm just saying it happens to exist as part of the continuum of alternative music. And if there was a little bit more, to be perfectly blunt about it, money involved to get writers who are more prominent and who are very good at short fiction, I thought it would take off. And I was almost correct. I put together a proposal a few years ago. People were very excited about it. The most common rejection letter was, "I can't wait till somebody else buys this so I can read it." which is extremely common. And that's out when it has when anthology has more of a crime element to it, less of a fantastical element to it. Many publishers only do that internally. That is, they don't want nobody that nobody sent. If it wasn't their idea, it's not a good idea. But thankfully, we found this guy, Richard Wood, who is a writer and always interested in publishing, and he has launched a publishing company called Ruadon, and he's very close. I worked with him very closely across all of this, and it worked out pretty well as far as putting the book together and getting it out there. And everyone who reads mysteries, I mean, there's a sort of demographic element to it. When you turn 45, no matter what you've been doing in your life, you start reading crime fiction. Like, science, and then they just turn when they're 45 to that. And that is the time people who grew up listening to alternative music are now turning 45, 50. And so I've cast this net over them.
I just turned 60, so some of us are now turning 60.
Soon the Westerns are coming. Do you hear the Westerns calling for you, Shane?
Yeah. But I find it's fun too, though. This conversation, I think, has some potential here because we're all kind of alternative music, people. I can't speak for you, but I can for Rich and for myself when I say we're kind of alternative music junkies. But I mean, we both have our different bags and whatnot, but I mean, it's like I embrace a lot of hardcore and ska punk and whatever else is just what your grandma would highly recommend you not ever listen to, if you want to get into heaven, pretty much. So yeah, I think there's some potential there, but I as an aside before I move on too much, when you were pitching your anthology, did you have this experience like when I was pitching Morbidology? And I hope this publisher never, ever listens to this particular episode of this podcast. But one of the publishers I published it to says, "That sounds brilliant. I'd love to write a piece for it."
No, I had the opposite, actually. I had the opposite happen. I ended up connecting with Richard because he had many years ago conceptualized an anthology of his own called Winter in the City. And back then it didn't quite work out. Crowdfunding wasn't quite what it is today. Ebook technology wasn't as great, but now 10 years later, he was ready for it. So he wrote me back saying, "Hey, remember me from 10 years ago? I have a publishing company. I want to do Winter in the City all over again. What do you think?" I said, "Oh, that's interesting. You're doing anthologies, huh?" "Yeah. Do you think Ellen Datlow will want to do an anthology with me?" And I said, "I think I want to do an anthology with you. You can get to Ellen Datlow later. Let's see if you work with me first, then maybe Ellen will take you seriously."
Yeah, we'll talk about Ellen later. Let's talk about me.
And it worked out, and he was excited for it.
But yeah, that was probably the funniest thing that's ever happened to me. That was contacting an editor saying, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And him saying, "That's brilliant. If you find a publisher, let me know. I'd like to submit something."
Oh, man. I have to tell you, there was a lost art out there. There's a lost art of the query letter. When I announced the book, some people queried me and say, "Oh, can I try?" And sometimes I said yes, and sometimes not quite. Depends on what the letter said. But for every person who queried me, I got somebody else on Twitter or social media saying, "How come you're not opening to submissions? Why don't you open to submissions? Maybe I'll send you something if you open to submissions." And this was, I was told, the done thing now, because people might otherwise feel too shy or too docile or too wary of power dynamics to send a query letter. But to my mind, sending someone a private business letter is far more egalitarian than saying on Twitter, "Hey, I have a great idea. Why don't you quintuple your workload? Maybe I'll pay some attention to you." Also, not even another cent, another month to make all this happen.
Right. Yeah.
I experienced these sort of very strange correspondences with people like you had and like I've had.
But it was one of those things too, though. Like I experienced that when John Taff and I finally got a publisher, to pick this up for us. I lost my train of thought there. Sorry.
You found the publisher, and then did the other guy write you back?
No, it was just that people started questioning our decision to do a no submission call, anthology, because it was all invites, but we kept our logic for that simple before we ever pitched it that way, and it was simply we're both pushing 60 years old, and these are all authors we want to work with while we're still breathing. So we want to invite these authors to work with us, and it was as simple as that, and now that we thought that up, I'll use that every fucking time I do an anthology, because I hate slush piles with a passion.
I actually don't mind slush piles, but I dislike the idea of being told that I have to do much more work because somebody might be too shy otherwise. When clearly, if you were on Twitter or on Facebook announcing to thousands of people, you're not a shy person.
Yeah.
But for my first big anthology, which I did do with Ellen Datlow, which is called Haunted Legends, as a tour anthology, I did open up a slush pile, and Ellen was very much, she said, that sounds great for you to do, and for me to have nothing to do with. And I will tell you, it worked on some level in that we got several stories from that slush pile, but it also did not work in that every single person, for the most part, had already had some kind of literary reputation. So 3 of them I knew already, and the 4th I did not know. But looking at his name, saying, oh, he's been in Cemetery Dance, he's been in Black Static, he's had several books out in the UK. So there was the idea of finding somebody brand new wasn't coming out of the slush piles. Yeah. But here in 20 Murders, I do have a new author, Cyan Katz. This is their debut fiction. Cyan Katz, somebody I happen to know via social media, and they took my class. I teach a creative writing class, and their stuff is very strange and weird and very raw. And they were clearly very into this music. So I said, why don't you give it a whirl? And they did, and they gave me a very raw, strange, crazy story, and it took some time to chisel and find the story within it. And it's a fantastic story. So I don't think one needs a slush pile to find new writers. One doesn't need just to be active in the world around themselves.
I agree with that. And I also agree that I think, you can maybe be a little bit more relaxed with the editor when they're paying professional rates, if they want to invite people, that they know have hit a stage of their career where they should be paid professional rates, quite honestly.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
If I'm offering 4 cents a word, then I'm going to probably have a slush pile, and I'm going to pay for it with my labor, But yeah, so, and I can't say, it sounds all snobbish and shit, and I've only published 1 anthology, so, there you go. I can't even, anthologist, I think I've gotten to about the first O in that word, and I can't quite make myself the full deal yet. But if you've done it with Ellen Datlow, you've pretty much just about reached the pinnacle of, universal godhood at that point.
Yeah, you're right, Shane. It's all been downhill since 2010. Nothing but misery and failure after failure. You're having me in your podcast.
I was just oh, go ahead, Shane.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask you, Nick, because I've always been interested in kind of like the process of putting together an anthology. And, you worked with Ellen, who's known for kind of curating stories and things like that. Aside from like professional rates, because obviously that's what a lot of people are looking for, what's like one thing you think is like critical to like the process of putting together an anthology, or like an underrated aspect? Because everyone kind of talks about, like budgets and things like that. But in terms of like selection, what do you think is like an underrated aspect of that?
I think people often make the error of thinking that their job is to find good stories, which sounds strange because, of course, you do want to have good stories. You want to have a pile of good stories between covers. But a good story is something that does something interesting. And so for an anthology or even for an issue of a magazine, what you want are stories that do different things. And certainly as a writer, I've been annoyed to write a story for an anthology and then see something with a very similar theme, but not as good right next to my story.
Mhm.
Why did you buy that seriously? It's also about what I'm mining. Oh, I see. He's your pal. Or oh, he's quite famous. Or we need to fill some pages. So there are times when I would reject a very excellent story if the story doesn't do anything in particular other than be very good. I often give the example in my classes of a photograph. A proper photograph has variable focus. That is, parts of it are in focus and parts of it are less in focus. When a photograph is entirely in focus, when every little bit of it is equally focused, it's a flat photograph. So what I look for are stories that do interesting things and that do something that other stories in the same anthology do not do. Having said that, I do have 2 stories about girls from Brooklyn. He'll kill somebody and run away to New York, Manhattan. But part of me, that's noir for you. We're going to go from Brooklyn to Manhattan in a noir story. But thankfully, they take place at different times. I even thought briefly, oh, should I write to the authors and have them have their characters meet briefly in the subway? But that was beyond the pale. That's what I look for. And I'm also very picky when I'm a buyer. When I shop as a consumer for an anthology in a store, what I go do is I open the book and I look for the last page of every story. And if more than half the stories end with a 1-sentence paragraph, I put the book right back on the shelf. Because the 1-sentence paragraph ending is the cheapest trick in the world. It works. It's a good trick. But if everybody's doing that same exact trick at the end, what about that, reader? 10 times in a row, it's less effective. So a story should also fit within the anthology by not hitting the same structural notes as other elements of the anthology. So those are the 2 main concerns I have as an anthologist that some other anthologists may not have articulated as thoroughly as I have.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense, because when you said that about like the like if everyone ends with like a 1-sentence ending type of thing, like that totally makes sense, that you don't want to have those kind of things. And also, like you said, the interesting element, because as someone who consumes anthologies, like especially like paying the good rates, that you're going to get a wide variety of excellent stories. So it's interesting to hear that, at least for you kind of look for those things, because I always wondered, I'm like, okay, they're probably getting like 40 excellent submissions. How do you pare that down to, something manageable?
Right. And stories bump into each other, but sometimes that can be engaging. I think there's a classic anecdote from the days of Asimov's science fiction magazine when Gardner Dozois was in there, and then 2 or 3 people, maybe just 2 people, sent in stories about Fidel Castro becoming a baseball player instead of becoming the ruler of Cuba. And normally one wouldn't buy those 2 stories, much less in the same issue, but he did, because they were radically different and they made sense together, juxtaposing them in that interesting way. But often people ignore this, and even television. I remember watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, rewatch. I don't really rewatch things, but I was rewatching these, and I thought, wow, they did that last week. Which, in 1987, when a week goes by of your high school life or whatever, you may not realize it, but when you're watching them 20 minutes apart, hey, they all lost their memory 2 weeks in a row? How does this keep happening? Let's do it again. We love when they lose their memories.
I had never thought about that, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When you're that age, when I was watching them fresh, about 5 years of 50-year-old life went by in that week. That's a lot of shit that happened in between when I watched that episode and the next episode. So yeah, now the convenience of streaming can really make you notice things you wouldn't have noticed before.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And that's what's interesting, kind of from like at least in that, like a more visual medium, is that like, the way telling those stories has changed. Cause like you said, Shane, like with streaming and stuff, now, there could be 8 seasons, 20 episodes a pop. You can watch them all back to back. Where like I remember, like you guys were saying, shows where you had to tune in like each week. So you'd have like the little recap and stuff. But I've always found that fascinating because now you don't have that same kind of structure, and it kind of stands out like when you rewatch shows and stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's part of
shit.
why I resist streaming. I resist binging. I don't like it as much. I will create my own weekly schedule, like a little Brandon Tartikoff, to watch a show. My kid and I are watching the new Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man show on Disney Plus, and they're all out now. But we're still saying I will watch it one a week, or maybe if they're really exciting, we'll watch one second one, but the next day, just to make it last and to not have it zip through so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sometimes self-controlled and sometimes not so controlled binger. Every now and then it's like I'll wake up in the morning and go, I fucking hate me. I just wasted that entire series in one night, and now I have to find something else to watch.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, and I think
I go your route and try to, set myself a schedule. Sometimes it'll be like, oh, I watched an episode of this and an episode of this on Wednesday, just to kind of pace myself.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Sorry, Rich.
Oh no, that's fine. I was just gonna say the same kind of thing. Like I think too, it depends on the length of this show. Like I don't know if I mentioned it to Shane. I don't think you had seen it yet. And I don't know if you saw it, Nick, but Mr. In Between. It's like a great crime noir show from Australia.
Hmm.
And what makes it kind of different is it's more of like a character study. Like there's plenty of, your trademark like fights and explosions and violence and all that in the criminal underbelly, but they're set in like 30-minute episodes. And those are the ones I have a hard time like kind of setting the schedule for because there's such a short time commitment when you factor in like the intro and stuff.
Oh, sure. And that's one of the interesting things about crime fiction in general. Like, why do we read Rex Stout novels?
Mm-hmm.
The crimes are interesting enough and the conundrums are interesting enough. But when we want to read all these Nero Wolfe novels that Rex Stout wrote, what we're looking at is Nero Wolfe aging slowly and Archie Goodwin aging slowly, and they're in the prime of their lives and they get a little older and they're experiencing new things. Oh, here's the telephone. Oh, what's the television's like? Mass transit. So we're getting little bits of these characters being built up over many, many novels, and that's a lot more interesting than just it being a series of crimes that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a struggle here too. Like I like crime novels, I like crime stories, I like horror stories, gothic noir, but they always had to be about something other than the case being solved or that criminal being shot or the guy getting away with it. It had to be about something thematically richer, about a character having some transformative experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, with some of the stories, it's interesting you mentioned that. Like some of the stories I read in 120 Murders, I felt like fit that very much in that like they have these transformative things, but they don't necessarily like wrap up neatly. It's more about like the experience they go through versus here's where they started, here's where they end. It's more nebulous than that.
Yeah. And I think that's also something I look for in an anthology as an anthologist. To my mind, any story that's worth reading should be worth rereading. And so if a story depends on a simple twist or aha, it wasn't a locked room, there was a secret door or that kind of gimmick, that can be intriguing, but you can't read it a second time. If you know the ending, and that is what the value of the story is in the trick ending or the twist ending, then it is not sufficiently interesting for me to publish. So it has to be something else as well as, or even instead of, frankly, that kind of gripping Law and Order style or classic talk to 4 people, the second guy did it type of mystery story. Or in horror, well, there was some horrific thing happening. I made some sort of social mistake, a social trespass, and now there's a ghost or a demon or a Cthulhu after me. What am I going to do? Nothing. The end is not as interesting as something else. I often say to my students, put your twist in the middle, and let's see how your character deals with this new changed world. And that's also what I look for as an anthologist.
Yeah, I don't have the experience to say what I look for as an anthologist, but I was madly taking notes with when you hit, as soon as you hit should be worth rereading, it's like my brain starts going, okay, which of the stories in our book are worth rereading? And it's like, yeah, so maybe I've probably learned something.
Yeah.
But
I'm sure they're all worth rereading.
Yeah. I haven't met any story that I was inclined to reread that wasn't worth rereading anyway.
That's right.
You know.
Although I will say I don't reread novels. I just don't have the time. Life is too short. But I'll always reread a short story when I have a chance. Like, oh, this is a nice 20 minutes hanging out of the tub, making sure my book doesn't get wet, that kind of thing. I like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, me
but not
too.
I just can't bring myself to sacrifice some portion of my life when there's another book I could be reading instead.
I have committed the egregious crime of admitting to the fact that I never read the author's preferred edition of The Stand because that book was fucking long enough the first time I read it. And too old to go back again and go for more. Yeah.
And as an editor, as an author, I always think, oh, the author's preferred edition? Yeesh.
Yeah.
At least in the 70s and 80s, editors were doing their job and had some good ideas about what a book should look like.
Right. And that's something we talk about a lot on this podcast. I've never met an editor that didn't mix the shit I wrote into something that people actually wanted to read. You know what I mean? So it's like, no, yeah, I had the creative vision and I put the words in place, but the editor made the words something that everybody else was going to want to read too, or not everybody, but I've never met an editor that didn't make my words immensely better than they were before I put them down, you know. So
I've had different experiences, but funnily enough, I published, of course, a lot with a small press and sometimes with large presses. And there was an inverse relationship, not a perfectly inverse relationship, but a broadly inverse relationship between the prominence of the editor and the amount of editing they do, at least in my stories.
mm-hmm.
That is, if it's an editor who is an editor because they got hit by a car and they got a big settlement in front of the publishing company, they really want to make all sorts of changes. And I remember, not to make this the Ellen Datlow Memorial Show or anything, but the first time I saw the story of Ellen Datlow, I was very excited. Like, oh, what's Ellen going to do to my story? What advice are you going to have for me? It's going to be mind-blowing. It's going to be great. It's like, oh, I found 2 places you can put commas in.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote back saying, did I miss something? Did the track changes not come through? It's like, no, it's 2 commas. 2 commas is it.
That's
but
glorious.
I remember once I wrote the line, he just had to laugh in a short story. And the editors came back saying, we made it, he laughed. And I wrote back saying, we have to set this. We have to keep it the way it was because those are 2 radically different sentences. They don't mean the same thing. And your version of the sentence might save you 3 words or maybe save you a column inch, but it's not transmitting what needs to be transmitted in this scene. And that's the kind of little changes that I don't think are appropriate. But when an editor is good, what they can do is stand outside the author and operate like the author's own executive function. Right? That you talk to yourself. When you talk to yourself and you say, hi, I'm Shane. Yeah, Shane, what are you doing now? Well, I don't know. That is a conversation that you need to have as an author. Anyone needs to have an author. And it is difficult to cultivate mentally. So the editor acts like the you in the back of your head. while also being estranged from you, then can see where you might be one might be too preoccupied with a certain character or a certain true event that happened to you, or a turn of phrase you love too much, or a little weird thing that you keep doing in all your stories. And that is, so an editor is sort of an egoless counter ego to the self. That is when they do an excellent job. That's what I try to cultivate in myself, both as an author and editor. Can I be this egoless person? And I'm not always successful, so I'm always very open. Like then when they want to set a sentence, I'm like, oh, go ahead, set away.
Yeah, and I've experienced that too, where someone wanted to change something so drastically that, like, because I'm first and foremost a poet, so every word I put down, even when I'm writing prose, it's like, but you just made 5 words 2 words, and it changed the whole sound and shape and everything of what I was just put down there, you know. So
that's right.
That's where I have to put my own ego aside sometimes too, and go, yeah, but this is better prose.
Yeah.
So I don't know, you know, but yeah, I'd like to engage more in the editing side of things, you know. But once again, sorry, I lose my train of thought all the time. I have terrible memory.
How about you, Rich? How's your memory?
Rich?
Somewhere in the middle between good and bad. Depends. More presence. It's funny you guys bring that up because I was just telling someone that today. Like my dad, he has like almost a photographic thing. Like he could tell you his phone number from when he was 5 years old and like 4 moves ago. Me, it's all very nebulous. But I'm always curious about that topic because there's like a whole podcast, and not to a free plug, I guess, but Craig Finn, if you guys are familiar with like Lifter Puller or the Hold Steady, he does a podcast called The Way I Remember It, and it's about the way artists like use their memory to like create their works, and he always starts it off like asking if they have a good memory or a bad memory. So it is an interesting thing because, you know, as a writer, you know, you'll draw upon your own personal experiences. It's not always like, you know, the main thing, but it's like fascinating how people remember certain things and if they put that in their work. And how about your memory, Nick? Good, bad, in the middle?
In the middle, and that I've got a very strong visual memory, but not a very good oral memory. I remember years ago, I was writing an essay about the comic book, The New Mutants, which I loved as a child. And I had gotten rid of my comic books because they're just burdensome to carry around the country. But when I was writing this essay about this comic, I asked an acquaintance of mine online saying, I need you to go and double check these panels I remember. And I wrote down 9 or 10 panels from many different issues. And she wrote back, okay, you got 8 of these perfectly right. You knew where they were on the page, you knew what issue they were in, you knew what they were saying, what the expressions of the characters were. That's incredible. Meanwhile, if I'm talking to a friend of mine and say, oh, remember when I said that? No. Did we talk about that? When was that? A year ago? Was that 2 weeks ago? And honestly, it gets worse here in California because I'm not a Californian. I'm from the East Coast. And so a lot of my visual memories are based on where I was at certain times in certain seasons. So in the cold winter, in the beautiful autumn, and the pleasant spring, and the gross summer. But here the weather's always the same. So I've often walked outside and thought, oh, what a great September day. And someone would say, Nick, it is April. So I lost a lot of visual cues since moving out here.
I can't imagine that. Yeah, I had never thought about that. I'm up here in Oregon where the weather's different, you know, every 5 minutes for the most part. But
in my part of California, the weather's different every 25 feet.
Yeah.
It's foggy, and there's another corner is blazing sun.
Yeah. But it just stays the same for hours on it.
That's right, yes, interminably.
Yeah. It's hearing you guys talk about like that, like different areas, I have to admit, one of my favorite stories that I've read so far, Nick, was Brian Francis Slattery's Never Let Me Down.
Oh,
And
so
without saying exactly where I am, I was reading, there's like a section in there where Ben and Jared are kind of like describing different areas. And like I was like, oh my God, I'm like, that's exactly,
Mhm.
kind of where I'm from.
Yeah.
So I thought that was cool. And that's one of the things that like connected me to it was, besides like the great characters and everything else, like I started picking up on the areas he was talking about. And then it helped me visualize that, like you guys were saying, like sometimes you miss visual cues and things like that because like you moved and there's no seasons. But like for me as a reader, just him saying those areas, I could picture all of them in my head.
Oh, sure. Brian is a brilliant regional writer, which we don't really talk about when we talk about science fiction, fantasy, horror, crime, being a regionalist. But he is a powerful regional writer of both Connecticut and what I would call, as a Long Islander, upstate New York. And if you're not from Long Island, that means everything north of the Bronx, all the way to Canada, is just this big blob of upstate. It's all Alabama. So the very company was French Alabama. But for people who are up there in upstate New York, they have a lot of other divisions. Oh, I'm from Central New York. I'm from Western New York. I don't care. I don't know what you're from either. You're from one of those places.
Central, yeah.
Where the
I could
gas
see.
station is the exciting part of town. I get it. And Brian really did nail that very thoroughly. I thought Kara Hoffman's story, she's also someone from, I don't know where Elmira is. Why would I possibly be care at all where that fucking place is? Where is it?
Right.
Central State? I don't know. But
Honestly, the work that brought it most into my head was from an out-of-state guy, Laird Barron, in his mystery series based there, Coleridge. I say,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
it's like, okay, that really made me realize, okay, but upstate New York is like, there's the state of New York, and then there's the state of upstate New York, and
That's
you
right.
seem to end right there at the wrong shit.
100%, because yeah, like and I think we talked with Laird about this when he was on. It's like, and I'm not a native New Yorker. Flyers hat. I grew up in the Philly suburbs.
Mhm.
But then I moved up here and like, yeah, I feel like especially with like crime, and that's why I love the Coleridge books too, is like anytime it's like crime in New York, it's always some faction of New York City.
Yeah.
But there's so many communities where, you have New York City and you have areas like that. And then you have like, it might as well be like, the deep South,
That's
but
right.
it's still in New York.
Yeah.
But that's something that you and Nick were talking a little bit about earlier, and that was when we were talking about crime noir, and like, I've never been anywhere close to the state of New York in my entire life, but when I was younger, when I first started making my attempts to write prose, I was mostly writing what I thought of as crime noir, and man, there's so many of those stories have the word Manhattan in every other paragraph.
Yeah, Brooklyn.
Yeah. So you can see how, it'd be hard to keep the crime out of New York City if you're writing about New York and crime. But
I
That's
was
like,
reading, just about finishing a great novel, speaking of upstate New York, called Negative Girl by Libby Cudmore, who is also, because I'm clever that way, a contributor to Murder. And Libby's from upstate, I guess. I don't know where Oneonta is. I know there's a college there. Is it upstate central? I don't care. But she's also writing about this kind of a college town, which is down in its luck. There was some industry there. Salt potatoes, a copper mine. I don't know what the fuck it was, but there's nothing there now. Just the way it is in New York all the time. There's a college, so there's a strong music scene, and she's very musical. So this is, of course, why I pegged her to get Story for Us. And she also has a background in Oklahoma. And so her story in 120 Murders is about Oklahoma and about the twisters and about the tornadoes that come out there. And it was interesting because I'm very picky, and I noticed something where she had a 7-Eleven that didn't call their icy drink a Slurpee. And I said, "What's going on here, Cudmore?" She said, "Well, in Oklahoma, they didn't do that." And she sent me a special link to like some article about, nope, in Oklahoma, they weren't called Slurpees until 1999. I was like, oh, you got me. You're right. That is the power of place. Where the people in Oklahoma know you've raised the flag. I've been here. I'm from here. I know this place. But people outside of that area know nothing about it. And that is also one of the great things about crime fiction and dark fiction generally, because dark fiction and horror fiction is also very regionalist. Obviously, Stephen King, obviously a ghost story is bounded by place and history and time. And of course, mystery fiction, why do people read mysteries? Often to go someplace they've never been. I've never been to Italy. Well, I've been to Italy now, but it's not great. But before I went to Italy, I would read plenty of Italian crime novels. Oh, this is exciting. And that's the kind of thing I was hoping to also get out of 120 Murders, which is not just a time based on the music, but places based on music, because things are regional hits. And some bands are huge in some places and tiny in other places. Well, I remember when The Cure was huge when I was in school. They were selling at the Meadowlands Arena, which is huge. They have football there. I know nothing about football, but I know a lot of people like it. So the Meadowlands is huge, right? 50,000 people, 70,000 people. But then when they toured Arizona, they were in 1,000-person venues. They were in clubs. Mm-hmm. And so one good thing about this anthology that I like was seeing who picked what bands and why, and how that song or how that moment in time when that song was popular is expressed not just in time, but in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I liked about a lot of the stories. Because I read like another anthology that was like music based, by Gray Matter Press, Savage Beasts. But it's what I liked about a lot of the stories in 120 Murders is it kind of takes more of the feeling of that song.
Yeah.
And then, because like, at least for me, I'm a bit of a newer writer. Obviously, the first tendency is like, okay, I feel like this song is about XYZ. So I'm going to try and make my story also fit that feeling. But a lot of the stories do their own thing. Yeah.
And there's also practical reasons not to do that. Because some stories are ballads, and ballads have plots. And it's not for you to write the story version of somebody else's song that has a plot, Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But what about music is, even people who have dementia, who are senile, if you play the songs of their youth to them, they'll remember them more thoroughly than they'll remember their own children. Because the music just enters our brain in a certain way that is so redolent of moments in time when we first hear it. And that's the key to this kind of eclectic writing, this writing about art, writing about music. What did it do to you? What does it mean to you? Not what's the song like?
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, everyone who I reached out to or who queried me got that intrinsically.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you said that they just got that, because that was another thing. Like, obviously, people who are just coming to the anthology as readers, they wouldn't know like if you had specific guidelines or anything like that. So I think it's interesting. Like, do you have any idea how they might have intrinsically got that? Like, I don't know if you did submission guidelines, or is it kind of natural that they just interpreted that? Because I think that's really interesting.
We did guidelines to a certain extent, but I did change them as time went on to widen them. Of course, the main thing, I didn't want people writing about the same song. I didn't want that experience that I had as a writer where, you're doing the same thing I'm doing. So we made sure to spread things out, and I even tried to avoid the same band. And thankfully, as we were talking about before, alternative music is such a huge church of different types of music. You can have Depeche Mode, like Never Let Me Down, synth pop, or Black Flag, or Cabaret Voltaire, or anything like that. So originally, the concept was it had to have appeared in a certain set of shows or radio programs during certain years. But then I blew it up to someone involved had to be there. So you could be somebody else's band or the solo work or something along those lines. And then I got a couple people who I was really happy to work with who were sort of story first people. I will tell you, I love Jeff Ford. Speaking of Long Island, Jeff Ford is Long Island's second greatest writer. Not watching this on the video, I'm number one. But Jeff Ford, very close second, I don't mind telling you. So when he writes me a query letter, professional query letter saying, hey, Nick, can I submit a story? I said, yes, of course you can, Jeff Ford. And this is not a spoiler because this is Jeff Ford's recurring theme over the past 15 years or so, 10 years or so. It's about a Jeff Ford-esque character whose wife hates him and can't stand that he's retired and sitting around the house all day. I don't know what's going on in Jeff Ford's life, but I hope it's not that. But so a great story. And I said, okay, Jeff, what song inspired this? He said, what are you talking about? Said, okay, Jeff, here's 3 songs that kind of fit. You pick one and pretend you liked it. So that is why Jeff Ford thinks he likes TV Party by Black Flag.
Well, at least he picked a good thing like. I have to say, though, just giving the opportunity to gush that Jeff Ford is easily the second best writer from Long Island.
Right.
No, Jeffrey Ford is one of my favorite writers, especially of the short form. There are not many short story writers on the planet that can write a story as well as he can. Yeah.
Absolutely. I was actually kind of embarrassed when he queried me because he shouldn't be querying me. I should be querying him. I should be crawling on my knees to beg for him. But I didn't think he liked the music. So it didn't occur to me. But then I realized, he can pretend to like the music. So it all worked out.
Right.
Don't tell anybody else. Just you and me and the podcast listeners know this now.
I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that he can pretend to like the music better than I can fucking like the music.
Absolutely, yes.
I don't know why, but the fact, like you said, that he said, he could pretend to like it, and that the song was TV Party by Black Flag, something about that just, it made my entire day.
I'll say a wonderful story from Todd Grimson, who is I guess he's making a comeback. I heard that his novel Stainless is coming out again. He had 3 novels, one of which was sort of I guess you'd call it an upmarket literary fiction, postmodern, and 2 wonderful horror novels. One was called The Brand New Cherry Flavor. That was a TV show on Netflix. And one Stainless, a vampire novel. And then he changed his name to see if he could do it again without his reputation. And he got that. And he kind of was like a lost soul a little bit, maybe. That may be, we can say lost soul. I don't think he'd mind that too much. But he sent me a story. Like, this is always amazing. And I wanted some cyberpunk in there, too, because I wanted all sorts of dark fiction, not just crime, not just horror. And when you send me a story about 2 gay cyborgs abusing each other, driving around the ruins of America, that is up Nick's alley and down Nick's street. Finally, that's what I like. But then I had to say, so Todd, what kind of music do you like? And we finally worked out to Cabaret Voltaire it is. What can I name a song? Oh, I can't possibly name a song. So he got a special dispensation. You don't need to name a song. You can just name a group. No problem. So we had some strict guidelines, but of course you must always make exceptions when you get something great. Mm-hmm. That is the role of the anthologist, saying, here are my rules, and now I know exactly when to break them to improve the situation.
Yeah, and that was, I think, the weirdest thing, like when we were editing Morbidologies is that people, it's like everybody who passed a story to me was like, number one, why are you asking me what I think? I could learn from you. You're so much better than me, So it's hard to get past that first, that I'm allowed to have thoughts about this story, But then also, like you just said, I'm allowed to break my own fucking rules if this person just broke them in a way that makes me want them to be broken. So
absolutely.
But Yeah.
I always say, this thing, writing and publishing, is not like the SATs. It's not designed to be a standardized system of trying to find the best. Even though I do agree, and I do think there are objective qualities to fiction, that some things are better and some things are worse. It's not just a matter of opinion or subjectivity. If it were, people would walk into bookstores like this and pick things at random because they could not tell whether something's good or not. But we have our intersubjectivities. We have our understanding as a social animal in a certain place and time, what we want and what we don't want. And so we have to treat these things like they're individual actions from proper individuals. I want a piece of you, not just a story that has good grammar and a 3-act structure and a Freytag's triangle, that kind of thing. It can be entirely opposed to all of that stuff if it works on some other set of levels.
This is our.
And so sometimes you get stories that, like, I got a story from Maxim Jakubowski, which is like, click, click, click. This is a super professional noir story. If you ask Plato, the great philosopher, you show me the great form of noir, it would be Maxim's story. Like, this is the noir story with all the little noir hits, the perfect example of noir. And then I have things that are entirely opposite of that in this book, that maybe have a crime. Kara Hoffman's great story, but another upstate New York story. I had to read a few times, like, what's going on in this story? Oh, is that a ghost? Maybe it is. Fuck it, it's great.
Yeah, but you're very, very good at selecting what to say. Fuck it, it's great. I'm going to take it anyway. You are actually very, very talented at that. You've proven it over the years. So.
Yeah, and that's like with 120 murders, like I feel like, and that's why one of the reasons why I asked you, Nick, about like the underrated aspect is a lot of times you'll see people kind of describe anthologies as like, oh yeah, it's kind of like almost like a buffet. Like I like some of this, I don't like some of that. But like with 120 murders, it wasn't like that, at least for me. I'm about a little past halfway, but like everyone, even though they're vastly different, I was like, oh, this is a great story. This is a great story. So I feel like that's like an important element of it too, is like you said, all those things that you've mentioned about anthologies, it applied to those stories because they were all great. Not
That's
really
right.
a question,
They're all
just a
great.
statement.
All killer, no filler. But I think it was relatively easy for me to do that because of the theme, which is college radio alternative music, which, as we're talking about, is so broad.
Mm.
It is different than saying heavy metal, which, because it's fairly broad, but it's not quite as broad as all of college radio and all of alternative music, which themselves have, several different genres inside of it. And so I wanted to have the experience of turning to that left side of the dial or that late night video show and not knowing what you're going to see and liking it because you don't know what's coming up next, even on the level of what the chorus is going to be like, or what instruments are going to be used, or whether the lyrics are comprehensible, or as sing-songy nursery rhymes, or even if there are any lyrics at all. That was the great power of college radio, the free form, as opposed to the very tight formats of hard rock, album-oriented radio, top 40 hits. Imagine, you don't have to imagine, it's all over the place. Imagine we're a radio show, we got 24 hours a day, we're playing 40 songs. Incredible. Why not play 400 songs and find the best 40 out of those 400 and make a book out of it? And that was, I think, what made that my own assignment of trying to do an anthology full of excellent stories possible, was because I chose the right format to do it and the right set of inspirations to do it.
Yeah. And like you said, alternative was a great one because I don't know if you guys have experienced this, and I hate that it even stands out that much in my memory, but like I'd be like, oh, I like punk rock or whatever. And then they're like, oh, okay, what kind of bands do you like? And you tell them the bands. And then they're like, that group's a poser or a sellout because they signed to this label or they changed their sound to that.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that was a perfect one because it allows you to have such a wide variety, and you don't have to kind of worry about that. But yeah, I still think about that. I'll be like, oh, I like this band, and some older, cool kid is like, ah, you're a sellout because they signed to a major label.
Yeah. Yeah, music has all these micro genres.
Yeah.
So you can. Is this dungeon synth? No, stupid. It's dwarfcore. What? Unless you're really deep inside, you can't possibly tell the difference. But alternatively, they embraced all those differences.
I never paid too much attention to the genres of music until I started actually writing around music, and it became clearer to me because even like, Steph Ellis and I are working on what would be, I think, our third book together now, and I initially pitched it as being heavily inspired and driven by industrial music.
Mm-hmm.
And then she started sending me song after song after song after song, and when I said industrial, I was thinking Nine Inch Nails and Ministry and shit like that. And all of a sudden there's all this weird shit coming into my inbox, and it's wonderful and it's wild, but it's like from a billion different subgenres of industrial music. It's like,
absolutely.
Yeah, just mind-boggling how much you can pull from music as far as genre goes. But
yeah, and I had a brief career where I reviewed music, and it's funny because like on the Onion and stuff, they'll be like, oh, these are the traditional tricks of a music reviewer. And it was funny because it's true, because it's like, you think about it and you're like, man, how many different adjectives can I use to describe the sound of a guitar?
Yes. Like factic writing is the great challenge of writing. How do you write about art? How do you write about a painting? How do you write about music, especially?
Yeah.
Especially since many millions of people know all about music. They can read music, they can play instruments. It's an abiding hobby and a career for many, many, many people, but there are also people who are totally ignorant of it. I love music. I don't know how to play guitar. My kid plays the guitar and the viola, and as far as I know, he sounds great. But I can't read music for him. I don't know what a tab literature is. Luckily, my ex-wife, his mother, is also very musical, from a very musical family. But how do you express these things, especially things like jazz? How do you express non-vocal music? It's almost impossible. I subscribe to a magazine called Razor Cake, which is a punk magazine. And these sounds great. All these reviews sound great. And then I find someone says, let's hear what this sounds like. Oh, this is terrible. This doesn't sound like cavemen beating a drum. It sounds like cavemen kicking a drum. What's wrong with this guy?
It sounds like a caveman getting beaten to death. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, as like honestly, a good teaching point that you just brought up. I've learned more about writing from writing about writing than I ever learned, just thinking about writing or reading about writing, but yeah, one of the biggest things I learned is that everything is a cliche somewhere along the way, so you have to be really cautious about how you place your words and make sure that you're actually trying to state your thoughts more than we're not visual artists. We're artists who want to make you see something that we're saying, basically.
That's vital, absolutely. And that's also true in all writing too. I mean, certainly one thing we have to militate against as editors and as writers, as teachers of writing, is the televisual imagination. Many students write the TV show or the movie in their mind, which never quite works out because things like pacing and structure don't work that way on the page. And luckily, because I had excellent writers, I didn't have to deal with this problem in this anthology, but it certainly comes up in the rest of my editorial life. Like, I see that you're describing a spaceship to me because you see an establishing shot of a spaceship, and then we go inside. But that's not how your characters experience the spaceship because they're inside the spaceship. They would not be thinking about the outside of the spaceship. But thankfully, when it comes to music, since we can all remember when we first heard our favorite song, or when we first realized our song was a favorite, we can make those connections, especially now, especially with the old days of college radio. There are many songs I love that I've never heard all the way through. For years, it took me years to find out who was that? What was that tune? What was that lyric? Because before the computer, before the internet, you were kind of fucked if you heard the last 2 minutes of a song and they didn't announce it, especially on college radio, where it was a bunch of DJs who were amateurs who would play for an hour and go, oh yeah, that first song was by Poor Dog Pondering, and the second song was by Abercrombie, and the third song was, no, slow down, I'm not getting it all down. And that, I think that moment of the lost music also comes up in this anthology frequently.
Yeah, I forget the title, but as you were saying that, and especially when you said lost music,
Yeah.
it reminded me, I wish I remembered, because they recently solved it, but there was for a long time, I think it was like a post-punk / like dance type track from like Berlin, and it was exactly what you were describing. Because like now you have things like Shazam and all that, and it has like all this stuff to draw off of. But I think if you looked it up, it was in Wired, and it was like this whole community that like did what you were saying. Like they'd be like, yeah, I remember this song. It was vaguely like Germanish. It had like these 5 words. And then they all kind of like collated that together. And it was such a cool thing because I even remember that too. Like even now I'll hear like snippets of words and then I type out like the line of the lyrics so I can try and find it later.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's a really cool story if you guys haven't seen it. And it's something like lost music or something. Oops, sorry. Lost Music Berlin.
I lost what I was going to say because I had my mic off, so I was talking away and enjoying myself, but not saying much. No, okay, now it's working. No, fuck it, I got nothing. You guys talk. No.
I had the same experience. I even mentioned it in my introduction. There's a song I heard on Night Flight on the USA Network once that had a cello and had a kind of grainy, low-resolution video, and it moved from left to right, and the word snob was involved somehow. It was the band name, the record name, the song name, something like that. And I even make an appeal in the introduction. If you ever heard what I'm talking about, or know this episode of Night Flight, please write to me, care of Ruad and Books. And I had a similar experience years ago with the cover of Prince's Kiss by Age of Chance, which was huge on MTV for one weekend. It was on heavy rotation for one weekend, and it was used as a bumper for one of their theme shows, like for spring break or summertime or something. It was never played again. And throughout the 90s, when I was living in Manhattan, and Tower Records right there, and a lot of people in the music scene, I kept saying, do you know this song? It's a Prince cover. Like, oh, you mean Tom Jones? No, not the Tom Jones cover. Something else. And it wasn't until 1998 when I finally had access to Google, and it popped up. And I got to hear Age of Chance's cover of Prince again. I thought, no, this wasn't so good after all.
So it almost ruined the magic.
It should have been a memory forever.
That was the thought that I lost too, is the I still walk around sometimes with lyrics in my head that I can Google, but nothing comes up. But I fucking know it's a song. Right. And then every now and then I keep trying, because every now and then I'll try, and one of those songs actually pops up, like somebody finally got around to recognizing that it was internet worthy and made it available to me. You know?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like there's this really fucking obscure band called Taxi from way back in, I think, 70s, 80s-ish, new wave, almost punk band. And for years and years and years, I had one of their songs in my head and couldn't pull it out, and I'd Google it periodically. And and nothing. And then one day, oh, boom, here it is all over the fucking internet, dude. Where have you been?
Oh, sure.
I feel like some of those lost music stories, though, like at least I think the appeal for me is that like nowadays, like you guys are saying, like with Google and stuff, there's not very many of those like mysteries left because everything's so available to everybody at every second.
Yeah.
So like when you stumble across those, and I'll be curious, Nick, to see if anyone gives you an answer, because I'll admit it didn't sound familiar to me, but like a small part of me, and I did do it, but I'm like, I think I could find this on Google. You know, I'll type in like a couple extra keywords.
I don't know what you could do.
Exactly. And that's the funny thing is that like it was just like that arrogance of like I really want to solve this because we don't have that anymore. You know what I mean? Like everything's so available.
I do the same thing though, Rich. You're not the only guilty party there. It's like, dude just doesn't know how to Google. So
it is a very natural thing because like I have the same thing. You know, it's kind of like that it's not quite the same, but like the whole Mandela effect, and people are like, oh, you remember this, but it was really this. And I'm showing my age. It's like the whole Shazam with Sinbad versus Kazam with Shaquille O'Neal.
Right.
And I'm like, I remember that Sinbad movie.
Yeah.
Like, if you said, hey, your life depends on this, I'd be like, yeah, Sinbad did this movie. But he really didn't.
No, I've seen that. Yeah.
I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. I've never seen either one of those things.
Yeah,
well, I've not seen one of them.
I'm showing my age, but if you Google like, because I was a kid, I was like a younger kid during like the early 90s, and that was like one of those family friendly movies back then. But if you Google Mandela effect, it comes up. But it is interesting, like you said, Shane. My first thing was like, I bet if I plug in a couple extra keywords, it'll pop up. Even though deep down,
it's actually Mandela effect, not Mandala effect. Mandela, that's Mandela, not Mandala, as in the sacred art of the East.
I'm so happy you went there, Nick, because I was going to go there and thought, no, don't get shit.
But see, that plays in the Shane thing.
Just spread the word.
I was playing in the Shane's thing because I'm always so nervous and terrified of mispronouncing people's names, and that's where that came from.
It's okay, Reach.
It's funny.
Yeah, and when we're not on the air, that nickname that he just gave you is going to get a lot more lewd, dude.
Reach. No, it's funny. It's funny that he did that because even though like my email and everything says Rich Duncan, I can't tell you how many people say like Duncan Rich or Duncan Richard.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Reach is fine.
People, it's a matter of attention span, really, is what it is. It's like my name is clearly Shane, but I get called Sean more than Shane, and have all of my entire lifetime, and I've been called Shannon, and it's like, where the fuck do you get Shannon from, Shane, other than shh? It's just, yeah, none of us, it's a really, really lightning fast paced world, you know. People just don't really give a shit what your name is, only their own.
Right.
But anybody who's read Nick Mamatas knows exactly what his name is, first and last, because they either love you to the moon or they just hate you to death.
Yeah.
You know? And I mean, the ones that hate you exquisitely.
Yeah. Everybody needs a hobby. I may as well be their hobby.
Yep. But honestly, what I was going to say seriously is everything that you personally write, as you know, as a creator yourself, is like I came into this show, as I said at the beginning of this episode, with I Am Providence, right? And I go into that thinking, I read the synopsis, and it's like, okay, cool, man. I've always wanted to go to that particular con, and I've always, this sounds like a blast, and I'm going into this with expectations. You know what I mean? And then you proceed in like the first 5 pages to shatter every fucking expectation I could possibly conceive of, and that's what you get from a Nick Mamatas story. Really, is you're a unique human being, and the words that you put out are unique. But yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that other than to say, is that I suspect by now I know the answer to this, but that's an intentional thing on your part, especially from the way you said that you teach. Makes me think, I wanted to do something different. So anyway,
yeah. So for those who don't know, I Am Providence is my novel that takes place at a Lovecraftian convention called the Summer Tentacular, and someone who some people might say, and I disagree with them, is much like me, is murdered, and everybody's a suspect because they all hate me. But it's just a story, like it says at the beginning. This is a work of fiction, not based on anybody true, especially not you, buddy. So, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to write a murder mystery, but I also did not want to write a murder mystery. I wanted to write a me book. And it is interesting because that book was not originally my idea. I was approached to write such a book by Jeremy Lassen, the editor at Nightshade Books, which is now, even then, was an imprint of Skyhorse, which is a publisher that is stapled together of different bankruptcies. All their imprints are failed publishers that they revitalized. And his pitch to me was, True Detective sure is popular, right? This was season 1 of True Detective, so it was popular. And what if it was True Detective meets Bimbos of the Death Sun, which is a comical mystery about a murder at a science fiction convention. And Harlan Ellison-esque figure gets killed there. And so it's on some level given to me as a concept, but nonetheless is correctly, as you noted, a very personal book. And that is kind of where we're at in books in general. Books are publishing is a 19th century mass production business. It is industrial manufacture. So it is creating certain types of objects that are physical and brought to stores and sold in mass quantities. But at the same time, the book militates against homogenization. They try to sell them like Pop-Tarts, but they're not Pop-Tarts because they are individual acts. And so what I always try to do for both myself and for students and people who I edit is try to get past the first couple layers of ideas, because the first idea you have is almost always the idea you saw on TV as a kid. And your second idea is, oh yeah, what if I did the old switcheroo and turn it upside down? And the third idea is the first actual Rich Duncan idea, Shane idea, Nick Mamatas idea, whoever idea. And then you kind of dig deeper, fourth, fifth, or sixth idea. That said, doesn't need too much to a commercial success, because honestly, the most commercially successful books are much like other books, and are designed to be much like other books, and are designed to be more homogenistic. But thankfully, I've been writing for a while now, and my first couple of books inspired a lot of people to do stupid things like enter the publishing industry. And so these guys and women who were in their 20s reading my first novel, Move Underground, in 2004, blew their lives away, wasted their existences by becoming editors at small presses. So I always have a market. Oh, Nick, you'll work with me? Of course I'll work with you. I've got nothing else going on, buddy. Absolutely. Let's put out a book. And that has been much of my career. That is my secret to not being very successful.
Many of us are grateful to you for that too.
Yeah. But as an editor, I'm far more commercial than I am as a writer, because I do have that commercial instinct to make a story more relatable to a mass audience. Both as an anthologist and as somebody in my day job in my other life. As a teacher, I've had several students who've sold to major publishers and have become fairly prominent. So on that level, I'm a good tinkerer. I'm a good mechanic of other people's.
I can tell you're good at your job because I don't take notes often when I'm talking to other writers. I mean, I take mental notes a lot. But as we've been talking, it's like I can tell he's a good teacher because I've got about 5 pages of red notes here where I've been scribbling shit. It's like, oh yeah.
Well, 2 of those pages are upstate New York sucks, but the rest of it is pretty
right. Right. Pretty much. I hate bagels. And
I have to say,
I'm joking about that, but that came out because a big part of the conversation with Laird Barron was about the Borsfell. And so anyway, sorry, Rich.
No, I was just gonna say I had to say, like, I meant to say it earlier, but when Nick was talking about like the different areas of New York, and he's like, "Oh, I don't know about this area." When he said salt potatoes, that is such a regional specific thing, man. That cut me to my core.
Yeah.
I have no idea. Even have no idea.
You don't want to know.
But yeah, I thought that was hilarious because I was like, that's so regional specific, but you knew what it was.
Oh, sure. I'm not a driver, but I've been a passenger in many a car and many a long, weird trip to nowhere.
That's something else that and I am going to have to cut this here pretty soon. Sorry, I'm looking up salt potatoes. Okay, yeah, no, I didn't want to know.
That's right.
It's like when I told John Foster about garbage plates.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Totally lost that. I should have never looked up salt potatoes. Okay, so
economics really ruins your mind.
Yeah.
But you said we had to cut this short because it's a 90-minute show. We got about 10 minutes left. So what do you got for us, Shane?
Well, I was just saying I'm about 10 minutes away from finishing this. We generally run 90 minutes, and I have to feed my wife so that I survive the evening.
Happy Valentine's Day, Shane's wife.
Yeah,
it'd be great.
It's like, what do you want to do for Valentine's Day? Well, I have a podcast. I'm gonna do. What about you, babe? But no, actually, just what we have the new anthology. When is this thing gonna come out, Nick?
April.
Excellent. So
April 8th, you can pre-order now. If you pre-order from the website, the Ruadon Books website, you get an extra bonus. You get a story by me in your email inbox that will not appear in the anthology, called Shriek of the Week. And we did this because of the tension between people being rightfully suspicious when an anthologist puts their own story in a book, but also some people want to see a story by a relatively prominent writer in a book. If I buy a Ramsey Campbell anthology, I want to see a Ramsey Campbell story.
Mm-hmm.
If George R. R. Martin puts out an anthology, people want to see a George R. R. Martin story. Now, of course, I am not Ramsey Campbell or George R. R. Martin, but are there 125 weirdos out there who would be disappointed if my story was in there? Well, they can pre-order and get it and print it out and rubber cement it into the end if they want the anthology. And then everybody else who reads the anthology will not have to suffer through my story.
Right. But actually, though, everybody, that's important. I mean, I have an M.R. James collection and an H.P. Lovecraft collection that are called the Ramsey Campbell edition. And if those Ramsey Campbell intros and stories at the end were not in them, then fuck calling that Ramsey Campbell edition. This is a piece of shit. You know?
But it is certainly true, especially in the small press, or even in some of the larger presses. Somebody will be, "Oh, I have 10 famous friends, and they're amazing, and also I've got a little story." And it's often the worst fucking thing in the book.
But you know, that's something you mentioned, and I will touch on that before because I'm flighty that way. And the thing about I bitched for years and years and years at look at this fucker publishing these anthologies and putting his own fucking story in this thing. Kind of a poser. You know, you're just publishing your own shit, dude. You know, right? And then John Taff and I had a very specific, when I went into morbidologies, I had a very specific number of stories I wanted, you know, because of the theme and everything. I wanted it to be specifically 13 works. And right before we published, 2 of our authors dropped out.
Right.
And it's like, oh, fuck, what do we do? Right. And John Taff and Dave Ward both go, well, you can write a poem for the intro, and John can write a story to fill the rest of it out. And it's like, motherfucker, I hate me right now because I have no better solution to this problem.
What happened? I did an anthology called Mixed Up, which was recipes, cocktail recipes, and short fiction about the recipes, sort of broadly similar to 120 Murders in this sense. And Molly Tanzer, who's in 120 Murders with a big novelette at the end about Weezer and her college days in a murder, was the cocktail editor, and I was the short story editor. But when we were trying to sell the book, it was very hard because editors are not always that bright. So they were thinking, book of recipe and story, where in book go? And store, me no understand. So I wrote a little story to put in the anthology, to put in the proposal to demonstrate what we meant. And then that ended up in the anthology. So yeah, I had to make a little bit of an exception because they didn't understand. And with even 120 Murders, people were confused. Editors saying, but what do you mean music story? How could this be? Thankfully, the local writer local to me, Elena Morley Shapiro, who wrote 2 wonderful thrillers, elevated thrillers, wrote a story for us based on a Soundgarden song, or based on the opening roar of the guitars in a Soundgarden song, which reminded her of the attack of 9/11. And she kind of misunderstood what was going on. So she just sent me the story right away. It's like, oh, here's the story for the anthology. Before we had any money, before we had an offer. But I was able to put that into the proposal, and then people understood, oh, I get it. It's not just writing out the plot of the story of the song. It's just a broad inspiration.
Right.
So sometimes you do need something, either from someone or from oneself, to help sell a book.
And the number one thing is what she demonstrated there, and that was pure enthusiasm for the project.
Absolutely. And when writers are enthusiastic, that really helps the book out, as opposed to the I crank out a story whenever I'm asked. Just type it away.
But man, I mean, this book, this anthology, you guys, there's some of the people that have or haven't been mentioned. I don't remember now, but Molly Tanzer is one of my favorite writers of all of history. Fucking love her. Josh Mallerman, super good friend.
A real musician too. He was an actual rock star, so his vision of rock life is spot on. Sylvia Moreno Garcia is a great writer who wrote her story while on painkillers from surgery with her thumb on the phone. And she's like, does this story make sense? And I said, no, it mostly does. Thanks. I can fix this up for you.
He even posted about that on Facebook.
That's
right. I just finished writing a story on my phone on painkillers.
Paul Tremblay has got a great story. He was telling me about it. I met him here in June. He came out to visit, and we had dinner. He's like, I'm going to write a story about the pizza place that doesn't take cards. What do you mean? It's like, well, it's a cash-only pizza place. Says, oh, no wonder you hate them. You better teach them fuckers a lesson. We got through agitated fine, and it worked out really well. That's a great story. We got plenty of Who else is in there we could talk about briefly? I don't want to leave anybody out, but of course I don't want to list everybody at the same time. But I think we've got a very solid mix. We got a story by Alex Jennings, who's a wonderful fantasist, and who picked a very obscure song. Something I had not heard before. It's like, wow, you went deep. He's a very huge music fan, and his first novel's about music in New Orleans. We have, I think, Cyan Katz, I mentioned the debut author. Selena Chambers, very interestingly, wrote a long story for me. It didn't quite work out. She's like, oh, I don't know. Can I write something cozy instead of noir? I'm like, oh, I guess you can write something cozy. And then there are like dozens of bodies piled up in a closet.
What makes you comfortable, motherfucker?
So there's something for everybody in this book. Check it out. 120 Murders, April 8th.
I can tell you guys, I know vast majority of listeners, vast majority of our friends, people who have been following and reading Nick's work or his anthologies over the years. This is definitely your cup of tea. And yeah, jump on. And if you haven't experienced Nick Mamatas, look the name up and dive into the madness, because it's a wonderful kind of madness, and we're grateful for you, Nick. Thank you for being here.
Oh, and thanks so much.
you.
You know, I got on this podcast because I put on my Facebook, please invite me back on your stupid fucking podcast about bullshit. But I got to say, this is not a stupid podcast about bullshit. This is a really nice podcast about bullshit. You do a great job, the two of you.
Right.
Thank you, Nick.
Rich was kind of proud of me because I shared that in exchange with him, and I think my response was, "Well, send me your stupid fucking book, and I'll put you on a podcast about bullshit."
It all works out. Yeah.
It was a match made in heaven, right there, motherfucker. So,
thanks so much for having me, and have a great evening. Have a great Valentine's Day, everybody. Stay warm.
And same to you, Nick. Thank you for being here.
Same to you, Nick.
We will have you back as soon as possible.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Should I hang up or you can stop recording? You press the button. Did you press the button?